You won't believe what this rude waiter said to Shaquille right to his face! In today's jaw-dropping story, a waiter goes too far insulting the rap icon, not knowing Shaquille holds the deed to the entire restaurant. But here's the twist. There's a secret about Shaquille's plan you won't see coming, so stay till the end. It was supposed to be a quiet lunch. Shaquille, dressed low-key in a hoodie and cap, walked into a high-end restaurant tucked away in a glass tower in downtown Miami. The restaurant was elegant, lined with white linens, soft jazz in the background, and waiters in bow ties gliding across the marble floor. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to see a 7-foot-tall basketball legend casually stroll into without security or flash. But that was Shaquille. Humble, private, and never one to flaunt what he had. He wasn't looking for attention. No cameras. No entourage. Just a peaceful bite before heading to a charity event later that afternoon where he'd surprise underprivileged youth with scholarships and sports gear. But then it happened. The moment Shaquille stepped through the doors, the vibe shifted. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations dropped to murmurs. And one waiter, let's call him Ethan, immediately clocked him with a look of distaste. Ethan was young, in his early 20s, freshly hired and still trying to make a name for himself in hospitality. But deep down, he had a chip on his shoulder. Maybe it was the pressure of trying to prove himself. Maybe it was his bias. Either way, when he saw Shaquille in that hoodie, he didn't see a man trying to blend in. He saw a stereotype. There is a special thing that you didn't know about Shaquille, the narrator says, but we will talk about that later in the video. Instead of greeting him with respect, Ethan rolled his eyes and offered a half-hearted table for one. Shaquille, unfazed, nodded politely. Yeah, something quiet if you can, Ethan scoffed. Of course, sir, he said, with a fake smile. Then under his breath, barely audible, another oversized customer trying to flex. He led Shaquille to a table tucked away near the kitchen door, the least desirable spot in the place. Shaquille didn't complain. He just sat down, calm and cool, eyes scanning the menu. When the time came to order, Shaquille asked, grilled salmon. Extra lemon, please. Ethan chuckled with a twist of sarcasm. You sure you can afford that? A few heads turned at the table next to them. A woman in a blazer raised her eyebrows. Shaquille paused. Not because he was offended, but because he'd heard this kind of thing before. Still, he wasn't about to cause a scene. Put it on my tab, he replied calmly. Ethan took the menu and walked away, smirking like he'd just scored some invisible victory. What Ethan didn't know was that the general manager, a man named David, had worked with Shaquille in the past. In fact, Shaquille had invested in this very restaurant just a year ago. But his name wasn't on the front door. He didn't care for glory. He just wanted good food and good people. You see, nobody will talk about this secret thing that they hide. But stay until the end because we will reveal it. Back in the kitchen, Ethan leaned over to another waiter and muttered, "Dude looks like he just walked off a street corner. Can't believe they let anyone in here these days." The sus chef, hearing the remark, narrowed his eyes. He recognized Shaquille, not just as a basketball icon, but as a man who had come by the kitchen several times before to encourage the staff, ask about their lives, even help fund their kids' education behind the scenes. The chef didn't say anything yet. Meanwhile, Shaquille waited patiently at his table. He scrolled through his phone, checked the time, and smiled at a little girl passing by who giggled when she noticed how big his hands were. When the salmon finally arrived cold, overcooked, and dry, Shaquille took a bite, then gently set the fork down. He didn't say a word. He just looked up as Ethan approached again. "How is it?" Ethan asked, arms crossed. "Could use a little warmth," Shaquille said with a kind smile. And the lemon didn't make it. Ethan rolled his eyes again. You could have gone somewhere more casual, you know. At that point, another waiter, named Caleb, stepped in. Caleb was older, seasoned, and had worked at the restaurant for years. He had seen Shaquille walk in and immediately recognized him. But Caleb also noticed the way Ethan was treating him, and he wasn't about to let it slide. "Excuse me, Ethan," Caleb said, taking over. "I'll handle this table from here." Ethan stepped back, annoyed. "Whatever, man." Caleb leaned down. "Mr. O'Neal, it's an honor. Let me personally take care of this." Shaquille smiled and nodded. "Appreciate it." Meanwhile, in the back office, General Manager David returned from a meeting and pulled up the security feed to check in on the dining floor. His eyes widened when he saw Shaquille sitting at the back corner, clearly unimpressed. Then he noticed Ethan's body language. The tension, the poor service. Without hesitation, David stepped onto the floor. The moment Ethan saw David approaching, his face paled. David walked directly to Shaquille's table and offered his hand. "Mr. O'Neal," he said warmly, "we're honored to have you with us today. I apologize sincerely for the experience so far." Ethan froze. His mouth opened slightly. "Wait, Mr. O'Neal." Shaquille gave David a handshake. "No need to apologize. Just wanted a quiet bite." David nodded, then turned to Ethan. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked. Ethan stammered. Yeah. He's that basketball guy, right?" David narrowed his eyes. "This basketball guy happens to be a part owner of this restaurant. He helped us open this location. Without him, you wouldn't even be wearing that uniform." The room fell silent. Ethan's jaw dropped. He looked at Shaquille, who was now just calmly sipping water, not even looking his way. David continued, "I think it's time you took your break." Ethan muttered an apology and left the floor, humiliated. Caleb returned moments later with a new plate, freshly grilled salmon, garnished with roasted garlic, fresh dill, and 3 perfect lemon slices. "I hope this one's better, sir." Shaquille took a bite, smiled. "Perfect." The story didn't end there. Later that week, a memo went out to all staff at the restaurant. It wasn't just about customer service. It was about unconscious bias. It was about humility, respect, and the kind of culture that leaders like Shaquille quietly build behind the scenes. Shaquille never posted about it. He didn't need to. But one thing was certain the next time he walked into that restaurant. Every person, from the hostess to the dishwasher, treated him with the respect he'd always deserved. And Ethan? Well, after a disciplinary leave, he returned with a new attitude, one that didn't rely on assumptions, but on service, humility, and grace. Because the truth is, you never know who's sitting at your table. And sometimes, the person you're judging is the one signing your paycheck. The insults kept coming. Ethan, emboldened by his own arrogance, thought he was being clever. He cracked jokes about Shaquille's massive frame, chuckled about his clown-sized sneakers, and even leaned in to comment on his fake-looking jewelry. "You got that chain from a gift shop, huh?" He laughed, nudging another waiter nearby. The other waiter, Marcus, didn't laugh. In fact, Marcus looked down in discomfort and quickly walked off, wanting no part in the disrespect. All the while, Shaquille didn't flinch. He smiled. He nodded. He even thanked Ethan for his service. It was like he was waiting for something calm, still, like the eye of a brewing storm. Patrons nearby began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. A couple sitting 3 tables away glanced at each other, whispering, "Isn't that Shaquille O'Neal?" A woman near the window discreetly pulled out her phone, turned on the camera app, and began recording over her menu. She didn't know what was about to happen, but something told her this moment wouldn't stay private for long. Anyways, the narrator intones, "Do you know that there is a thing that nobody talks about on this subject? "Don't worry, we will talk later about it." Ethan remained clueless. He strutted away from the table like he had just put a rude customer in their place. His arrogance didn't go unnoticed, especially by the other staff. Just then, the restaurant's front door opened, and in walked David, the manager, a well-dressed man in his late 40s with reading glasses, crisp posture, and years of experience under his belt. He had stepped out for a quick meeting with the property owner, thinking everything would be under control for the lunch rush. But as soon as he entered, he noticed the silence. The air felt stiff. Then he saw him, Shaquille, sitting there, calmly sipping water at a back table, alone, unbothered, watching. David's face went pale. "Oh no," he whispered to himself. "He's back." Because the truth was, Shaquille wasn't just a customer. He was one of the silent partners who had bought into the restaurant when it was weeks away from shutting down 2 years ago. The pandemic had nearly buried the place. Layoffs were looming. Rent was unpaid. And David, desperate to save what he'd built, reached out to a connection from a charity gala he'd hosted years prior. That connection happened to be Shaquille. In less than a week, Shaquille had wired over a 6-figure investment, under one condition: no PR, no branding, and no special treatment. "I just want to keep the place running," he had said. "And I want the staff to be treated right." David had promised just that. But now, watching Ethan carelessly laugh across the floor, he felt like he'd betrayed that promise. He rushed toward the kitchen, bypassing the floor staff, and summoned Marcus. "Who's waiting on Mr. O'Neal?" he asked, already dreading the answer. Marcus hesitated. It's Ethan, sir." David's heart dropped. In the dining room, Ethan continued to move through tables with fake charm and a lazy smile, until David marched straight up to him and pulled him aside. "Come with me," David said through clenched teeth. Ethan followed, confused and annoyed. "Did I do something wrong?" They entered the back office. The door shut. David turned around. "Do you have any idea who that man is?" Ethan shrugged. "Some tall dude trying to look rich. I think he used to play basketball or something." David's face twisted in disbelief. "That tall man is Shaquille O'Neal. He is a global icon, a Hall of Famer, a philanthropist, and most importantly, he owns part of this restaurant." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" "His money saved this place from going under. He pays your salary. He's the reason we still exist." Ethan's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. David didn't wait. "Go home. Effective immediately. We'll call you when we decide your future here." But Ethan tried to protest. David cut him off. "I told you when you started we treat every guest with dignity. You broke that trust." Ethan left the office, humiliated. As he exited through the side door, the woman with the phone caught him on video walking out with his head down. Back on the dining floor, David approached Shaquille. "Mr. O'Neal," he began, voice low and sincere. "I want to apologize. This is not who we are, and it will be corrected." Shaquille looked up and smiled gently. "I know. That's why I came back. You have every right to be angry." Shaquille shook his head. "Anger doesn't teach. Grace does." David was silent for a moment. Then, with a subtle bow of gratitude, he turned and instructed Caleb to serve Shaquille personally for the rest of his meal. What happened next was unexpected. Shaquille didn't just finish his lunch. He walked to the kitchen and shook hands with the line cooks. He stopped by the hostess stand and thanked the teenage girl named Ava for her politeness. He even left a tip big enough to cover every server's shift that day, and then some. You see, nobody talks about how power can be quiet, how real authority doesn't need to announce itself. But stay around the right people long enough, and the truth eventually reveals itself. Later that week, the footage the woman recorded went viral. It didn't show Shaquille saying a single word. It simply showed Ethan mocking him and Shaquille smiling through it all. The video was captioned, "This man stayed calm while being insulted by someone who didn't know he was the boss." Within 48 hours, it hit 12 million views. Comments poured in, "He's the definition of class." Some people learn the hard way. "This is why I admire Shaq more off the court than on it." But behind the scenes, something more important happened. David sent out a company-wide memo. Every customer deserves dignity. Every team member represents more than themselves. And the true measure of leadership isn't how loud you are, but how you lift others, even when they're small-minded. And Ethan, he was invited back a month later not to serve, but to attend a company training session on unconscious bias, empathy, and respect. At first, he was defensive, but as the lessons sank in, and as he saw the overwhelming response to the viral video, something shifted in him. He returned to the restaurant 6 weeks later, not as a no-itty, all rookie, but as someone who understood what real service meant. He approached Shaquille the next time he visited, this time with eyes lowered. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Ethan said. "You didn't deserve that, and I've got a lot to learn." Shaquille smiled again, the same calm, graceful smile. "We all do," he said. "But it starts with listening." That day, Ethan shadowed Caleb, who taught him how to serve with honor. Not for tips, but for trust. Because respect isn't about status. It's about seeing people for who they are, even when they don't show you who they are right away. Shaquille stood up calmly, his tall frame cutting through the space with quiet confidence. The murmurs around him quieted as his feet moved steadily toward the front of the restaurant. The low hum of conversation halted when his presence commanded attention. He wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for confrontation. But there was an undeniable power in the way he carried himself, a strength that demanded respect without raising a voice. As he approached the front, the servers began to whisper among themselves. Even the manager, David, who had just finished talking to Shaquille about the situation with Ethan, felt a sense of unease. He could feel what was coming, but even he wasn't prepared for the full weight of it. Ethan, still standing in the corner, rolled his eyes. "Oh, great. Here comes the complaint," he muttered to himself, his attitude dismissive. His posture slouched like he had seen this play out 100 times before. To him, Shaquille was just another entitled customer. Just another guy who would complain and cause a scene. Ethan had no idea that this was a scene he wouldn't forget. Shaquille reached the front, and the room fell into a silence, so profound that it seemed to suck the air out of the space. Every eye was on him now, the tension thick in the air. Shaquille didn't need to shout or raise his voice. He simply spoke with quiet authority, and everyone listened. "I'm not just a customer," he said, his voice calm but laced with gravity. "I'm the reason this place is still standing. I own it." The words hung in the air for a split second, as if time had stopped. The silence deepened, and the sound of a fork dropping from a nearby table was the only thing that broke the stillness. The eyes of every person in the room widened as realization slowly sank in. They had all underestimated him. They had all assumed that the man in the hoodie and cap, who had come in looking for a quiet meal, was just another average guy. But now they knew. He wasn't just anyone. He was Shaquille O'Neal, the Shaquille O'Neal. Ethan's face turned ghost white. His smug expression melted away as the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His entire body seemed to freeze, and for the first time that afternoon, he realized he had made a grave mistake. The room stayed still, every person on edge. A few of the waitstaff exchanged nervous glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had been serving this man without even knowing who he was. But now, it was impossible to ignore the truth. David, the restaurant manager, stepped forward. His face was tense, and there was an unspoken weight in his gaze as he addressed the staff. "Shaquille is telling the truth," David said, his voice steady, but with a hint of remorse. "Mr. O'Neal is our primary investor. He's been here long before most of you were hired, and he's the reason this place is still open today." The realization hit the staff like a wave. Some of them looked down at the floor in embarrassment. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The moment Shaquille spoke, the dynamic of the restaurant had completely shifted. The man they had so carelessly judged was not only someone they should have respected, but also the one who had saved their jobs. Shaquille didn't linger on the impact of his words. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned to face Ethan. The air was thick with anticipation as Shaquille walked slowly toward him, each step measured and purposeful. Ethan, who had once been so confident, now stood frozen in place, unable to move or speak. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was humiliated. His entire demeanor crumbled under the weight of the truth. Shaquille stopped in front of Ethan, looking him dead in the eyes. The room held its breath. "You judged me without knowing who I was," Shaquille said, his voice low and steady. "You disrespected me and embarrassed yourself." The words were simple, but they hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? How could he justify his actions? Everything he had thought about Shaquille, about the man sitting before him, had been wrong. He had treated him like an ordinary customer, someone he could mock, someone he could belittle without consequence. But the truth was, he had no idea who Shaquille really was. He had no idea about the man's legacy, his accomplishments, his character. And now, in front of everyone in the restaurant, Shaquille had made sure that Ethan understood just how badly he had misjudged him. For a long moment, Shaquille didn't say anything more. He simply stood there, waiting for Ethan to process the weight of the situation. It was a silent lesson in humility, in self-awareness, and in respect. And as the seconds stretched into what felt like eternity, Ethan's confidence shattered even further. But Shaquille didn't just leave it at that. "You know," he continued, his voice still calm, "I didn't come here today to cause a scene. I didn't come here to make anyone uncomfortable. I came for a quiet meal, a peaceful break before my event. But sometimes, life forces you to teach lessons that others may not even realize they need to learn." The words seemed to hang in the air like a lesson etched in stone. Shaquille wasn't angry. He wasn't out to get revenge. He was simply showing Ethan the impact of his actions, the consequences of judging someone based on appearances, of assuming that you knew someone just because you thought you could read them. The staff remained silent, absorbing the lesson in real time. They could see the effect that Shaquille's words had on Ethan. The young waiter, once full of bravado, was now a man humbled by his own ignorance. Shaquille turned back to the rest of the staff, his demeanor softening slightly. "We all have a choice in how we treat others, and sometimes you don't get a second chance to make things right. I hope this can be a lesson for all of you." Ethan, standing there, still couldn't find the words to respond. His face was red with embarrassment, his body stiff with shame. He had hoped that Shaquille would be just another rich, demanding celebrity, someone he could dismiss. But now, Shaquille had proven that there was much more beneath the surface, a depth that Ethan hadn't even begun to understand. Finally, Shaquille turned and walked back to his table, as calmly as he had arrived. He didn't need the validation. He didn't need the apology. He had already made his point. He simply sat down, as if nothing had happened, and continued with his meal. David, still standing at the front, looked around at the staff. His eyes met Ethan's for a moment, and he gave him a small nod, one that spoke volumes. The manager didn't need to say anything else. The lesson had been delivered. Ethan, however, was left standing there, his mind racing. The weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew he had messed up. He knew he had made a fool of himself in front of his entire team and in front of the most important investor in the restaurant. The rest of the shift passed by in a blur for Ethan. He worked with his head down, avoiding eye contact with the other staff. He tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to Shaquille, to the lesson, to the shame. As the day came to a close, David pulled Ethan aside once more, but this time his tone was different. "Ethan, I know you've made a mistake, and I'm not going to fire you today. But this is a wake-up call. You need to take responsibility for how you treat others. People like Shaquille, they don't need to prove themselves to you. They've already earned that respect. It's up to you to give it." Ethan nodded slowly, still feeling the weight of his actions. "I understand. I'll do better. I promise." And just like that, the lesson was learned. But for Ethan, it was only the beginning. The video of the encounter went viral the next day, and the world saw what had happened. The internet flooded with comments praising Shaquille for his grace under pressure. People admired the way he handled the situation, not with anger or revenge, but with calm, quiet dignity. And, as for Ethan, the story of his humiliation would serve as a reminder to everyone who watched that it's never a good idea to judge a book by its cover. Shaquille's calm demeanor was something that Ethan couldn't shake off. It wasn't what he expected. There was no fiery outburst, no immediate firing or public humiliation, only a quiet, thoughtful decision. That was the thing that hit Ethan hardest. The man he had disrespected wasn't reacting the way a typical celebrity would. Shaquille didn't act like the arrogant rich person that Ethan had presumed he was. He didn't have the need to prove anything by making a scene. Instead, he gave Ethan the one thing most people never get: a second chance. Shaquille stood tall, looking at Ethan without judgment, but with an air of understanding. "I've been judged my whole life," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of experience. "But I still made it, so I'll give you a choice." Shaquille paused, his gaze never leaving Ethan's eyes. "You can quit now or stay, learn respect, and earn it back." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the gravity of the decision that lay before Ethan. This wasn't just about saving face. This wasn't about simply keeping his job. It was about something deeper, something more important. It was about character, growth, and the kind of person he wanted to be. Ethan stood there, his heart racing, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. His pride was bruised, his ego shattered. He had spent the whole day reflecting on his actions, on the way he had judged Shaquille, not knowing a single thing about him. It had been so easy to dismiss him. He had assumed Shaquille was just another wealthy celebrity who could be poked fun at. But in a single moment, all of that had come crashing down. He wasn't just a wealthy celebrity. He was a man who had worked his way to the top, who had earned every bit of his success. And he had given Ethan a chance to learn from his mistake. "I'll stay," Ethan finally said, his voice shaky but firm. "I'll stay, and I'll do better." Shaquille nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "That's the right choice. Take your time. Make it count." And with that, the matter was closed. Shaquille didn't linger, and he didn't expect anything in return. He simply turned and walked back to his table, resuming his quiet meal. He had given Ethan the opportunity to redeem himself. Now, it was up to Ethan to make good on that promise. The days that followed were some of the most difficult of Ethan's life. He was no longer the confident, cocky waiter who thought he knew everything. No. Now he had to face the reality of what he had done. He had to grapple with the fact that he had insulted one of the most respected men in the world, and that he had been given a rare opportunity to make things right. Ethan worked harder than he ever had before. He took on double shifts, showing up early, staying late, and putting in every ounce of effort he had. He volunteered for tasks that he would have previously avoided. He washed dishes, cleaned the floor, and even helped out in the kitchen when the staff was short-handed. His pride took a backseat. What mattered now was proving that he was worthy of the second chance that Shaquille had given him. One afternoon, as he was wiping down a table, he overheard two of the servers talking about him. "Have you noticed how much he's been doing lately?" one of them asked. "Yeah, I've never seen him work this hard," the other replied. "I think he's really trying to make up for what happened." Ethan didn't say anything, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was the first time in a long time that he felt like he was truly earning something, not just a paycheck, but respect. But the real test came when he had to face Shaquille again. He hadn't seen him much since that fateful day. Shaquille had continued to visit the restaurant on occasion, but his presence was always quiet, unobtrusive. He never drew attention to himself. He came, ate, and left just as he had before. But this time, when Shaquille entered the restaurant, Ethan was ready. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the encounter. He had to do this. He had to show Shaquille that he had learned from his mistake. Shaquille was seated at his usual table in the back, a spot away from the crowds, just as he liked it. Ethan approached, trying to keep his nerves in check. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that this moment was going to matter. This was his chance to prove that he had changed. "Mr. O'Neal," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for the second chance you gave me. I was wrong. I disrespected you, and I'll never be able to fully make up for that. But I want you to know that I'm working hard to earn your respect, and I hope you can see that." Shaquille looked up at Ethan, his expression unreadable for a moment. Ethan held his breath, unsure of what Shaquille was thinking. But then, Shaquille's face softened. A slow smile spread across his lips as he nodded. "I see it," Shaquille said. "I've been watching you, Ethan. And I'm proud of the effort you're putting in. Keep it up. It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish." Ethan's chest swelled with pride at the words. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of the change he had worked so hard to make. Shaquille had noticed. And that meant everything. Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued to improve. He didn't just become a better worker, he became a better person. He learned the value of respect, of humility, and of hard work. He learned that there was always room for growth, no matter how old you were or how much you thought you knew. One evening, the restaurant's newsletter came out, and to Ethan's surprise, there was a special mention of him. The manager had decided to highlight the progress he had made, and Ethan's apology was published for the whole restaurant to read. It was a small gesture, but it was a significant one. It showed that people noticed his effort, that they saw the changes he had made. The restaurant's regulars began to take notice too. They saw Ethan's growth, and they started to treat him with a newfound respect. He wasn't just the waiter who had made a mistake. He was the waiter who had worked hard to redeem himself. And that made all the difference. Ethan knew that he couldn't undo the past, but he could shape his future. And as the days turned into weeks, he realized that the second chance Shaquille had given him wasn't just about his job. It was about his life. It was about learning to see people for who they truly were, not based on assumptions or appearances. It was about embracing the idea that anyone, no matter where they came from, could grow and change. In the end, Shaquille's lesson went beyond the walls of the restaurant. It was a lesson that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes, the best way to earn respect is through hard work, humility, and the willingness to admit when you're wrong. As for Shaquille, he never mentioned it again. He didn't need to. He knew that what he had done for Ethan was enough. The lesson had been taught, and the impact would last a lifetime. What began as a simple act of judgment and disrespect by a waiter named Ethan had transformed into something much bigger, something that no one could have predicted. Shaquille's decision to offer Ethan a second chance wasn't just a gesture of personal forgiveness. It sparked a series of changes that would ripple through the entire restaurant, the staff, and eventually, the local community. Shaquille knew that the moment he had with Ethan was more than just about correcting a wrong. It was about making sure that everyone who came through the restaurant doors felt respected and valued, regardless of their background or appearance. Shaquille had always believed in the power of second chances, but he also understood that growth required more than just forgiveness. It required action. This wasn't just about one waiter making amends. This was about creating an environment where respect, humility, and equality were embedded into the culture of the restaurant. It was about teaching the staff the importance of seeing each person for who they were, not based on their appearance, their income, or their assumptions. So, Shaquille took action. He initiated a new employee training program that would be mandatory for all new hires, but also available as a refresher for existing staff members. This program wasn't just about teaching the basics of good service. It was about creating a culture of inclusivity, humility, and respect. The training focused on several key pillars: racial awareness, understanding different cultures, respecting personal differences, and how to approach every customer as an individual rather than a stereotype. Shaquille reached out to experts in racial awareness and customer service, inviting them to speak to the staff. They spoke about unconscious bias, the history of race relations, and the ways in which small actions, like a simple glance, a word, or an assumption, could hurt someone without even realizing it. The staff was pushed out of their comfort zones, challenged to think deeply about the way they interacted with people, and most importantly, about the way they judged others. But Shaquille didn't stop at speakers. He wanted to give his team something tangible, something that would help them see the world through a different lens. So, he organized surprise community events, meet and greets, where local kids could come in, meet the staff, and spend time with Shaquille himself. These events were designed to break down barriers and help the employees connect with their community in ways that went beyond serving food and drinks. It was about building relationships. It was about seeing the people you serve as real people, not as faceless customers. At first, the idea seemed a little unusual to some of the staff. Why would they be meeting kids from the neighborhood? They weren't sure what to expect, but Shaquille believed that by giving back to the community, they could create a sense of shared purpose and pride in their work. And that's exactly what happened. The kids who came to these events were from all walks of life, and many of them were in awe of Shaquille's presence. They weren't starstruck, they were inspired. They saw someone who had come from humble beginnings, who had worked hard to get to where he was, and who cared enough to give back to his community. That made a huge impact on the staff. It wasn't just the kids who learned from these events. It was the staff as well. They realized that Shaquille wasn't just a famous celebrity or a businessman. He was someone who understood the importance of lifting others up, of setting an example for the next generation. And through these interactions, The employees started to understand what Shaquille was trying to do. They began to realize that respect for others wasn't just about doing your job well. It was about recognizing the humanity in everyone you interacted with. The restaurant's culture began to shift. Ethan, who had been the one to insult Shaquille in the first place, was now one of the program's biggest advocates. He had worked hard to redeem himself and had made a commitment to living up to the lessons he had learned. He became a mentor for new staff members, sharing his story with them so they could understand the importance of humility and the impact of their actions on others. Ethan's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. He had gone from being a guy who judged others based on appearances to becoming one of the restaurant's most respected waiters, known for his work ethic, kindness, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. One evening, after Shaquille had hosted yet another community event, he received an email that would change everything. A social media post about Ethan's story had gone viral. It wasn't just a viral post about a famous person or a moment of drama. It was a story of redemption, growth, and the power of second chances. The post detailed Ethan's transformation from a disrespectful waiter to a dedicated, humble, and respected member of the team. It showcased how Shaquille's decision to offer him a second chance had not only changed his life, but had inspired others to be better. The post was shared across platforms, with people commenting on how much they admired the way Shaquille handled the situation and how they respected Ethan for owning up to his mistake and working hard to earn his respect back. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly, Ethan's face was everywhere. But this wasn't the viral moment he had feared, the one where he was humiliated in front of the world. No, this was a moment of triumph, a moment where people saw the kind of change that can happen when you learn to respect others and take responsibility for your actions. The story quickly spread beyond the local community. National news outlets began reporting on it, with headlines about how Shaquille's restaurant had become a model for inclusive leadership and how Ethan's journey had become a symbol of personal growth. People were inspired by the story, and they began sharing it in their workplaces, schools, and social circles. It was a reminder that no matter who you are or where you come from, you always have the power to change, to learn, and to make things right. For Ethan, the viral success was bittersweet. He was grateful for the recognition, but he knew that his journey wasn't over. Being a better person wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something you had to work at every day. And though his story had inspired others, he understood that the real measure of success would be in how he continued to live his life, in the small, everyday moments where he could make a difference. Meanwhile, Shaquille's restaurant saw a surge in business. The media attention had brought in new customers who wanted to experience the place where this inspiring story had unfolded. More people came, not just for the food, but because they wanted to be a part of something bigger. They wanted to be part of a community that valued respect, growth, and second chances. Shaquille wasn't interested in the publicity or the boost in business. He didn't care about the headlines or the viral fame. What mattered to him was the change he had sparked, not just in Ethan, but in the entire restaurant. He had created a culture of kindness, respect, and humility, one that extended beyond the walls of the restaurant and into the community. And, as he continued to lead by example, Shaquille knew that the real impact of his actions would be felt for years to come. In the end, what had started as an awkward, humiliating moment for one man had turned into a powerful lesson for the entire staff, the community, and anyone who heard Ethan's story. It showed that no one is defined by their mistakes, and that everyone has the power to change. It also proved that true leadership isn't about being the loudest or the most powerful. It's about lifting others up and inspiring them to be better. And that's exactly what Shaquille had done.